Well, I'm going in there. If I make it out, I want you to come out to the Waist-Wield with me. Get out of here. It's bad here. Come stay with me. At least until this dragon stuff blows over.
Mizik is always happy to travel beyond Riverhold. Dragons in his own homeland. What else must he do but flee?
Oh, hey guys. I was just showing my house guest around.
Greetings! This one is Mizik Thunderboots, investigator of mysteries, solver of crimes. Clients pay well for Mizik's services. This one's skills at deduction are without peer. It is the violent aspects of the work that make Mizik's fur crinkle.
Well, there you have it, Mizik Thunderboots. So now that we're back in the Waist-Wield, I've got another Necromancer build for you. This was supposed to be from the live server, but Necro is actually getting a nice little buff in the coming update. Because of that, I'm back on the test server, so I can run 2 of the skills getting updates. This is a copy of my live character, except for this guy's a Khajiit, and the 2 skill changes I referred to. Khajiits have really grown on me to the point where I want to change my character on the live server. I think it was Razum Dar that started me liking Khajiits. Anyway, today's setup uses some gear that's a little more interesting than the basic stuff I usually focus on. It's also a little harder to come up with, but it's worthwhile if you can get your hands on it. There may be 1 or 2 more videos with upgraded gear before I do some more with basic gear. I'm not getting away from the channel's focus, but like I said in the last video, I want to keep things from getting stale. Alright, let's go ahead and look at the character sheet. Here on the character sheet, you can see I'm a Khajiit Necromancer, and Khajiit is a top stamina damage dealer race. I'm using my usual food, and that's lava foot soup and salt rice. This is what I run 99+% of the time. A couple of things I might swap to include Artaeum Takeaway Broth or Orzorga's Tripe Trifle Pocket. It depends on the content, but for dungeons I seldom switch out to anything else. I'm using the Thief Mundus Stone, and I'll spare you my rant against taking the Lover for once. Here at the top of the character sheet, I've got all 64 attribute points in stamina, which is my primary resource. I wind up with 20,000 points of health and 30,000 points of stamina. I've got 1,400 points of stam recovery, and that's right where it needs to be. Unbuffed weapon damage is 4,400 and critical chance is at 34%. Buffed by a potion, that crit is going to go over 40%, which in my mind is the minimum value. In my experience, if I get below that, things that depend on crits stop working reliably. Okay, let's move on to the skills. I've been tracking you down all day. I knew you couldn't just stay at my place and rest. So Lady Weatherly died and you're here helping with the will and investigating a murder?
Oh, yes. Helping with the will is a cover. Not only was her death sudden and mysterious, but now her fortune is missing and her long-lost son has returned. A great many threads for one's claws to get tangled in.
Sounds like it. Maybe I can give you a hand. Especially since you don't like violence. That's kind of a specialty of mine. This is a 2-bar build with a greatsword on the back and dual-wield daggers on the front. I'm using a static rotation with this, and if you're an average player like me, you'll want to stick with static rotations. A static rotation is a rotation that doesn't change. You go through it in the same order each time until whatever you're fighting is dead. My first skill in this rotation is Gravelord's Sacrifice. Thanks to a change coming to the live servers, I no longer have to be in combat to cast this skill. Now this doesn't make a huge difference in prolonged boss fights, but it's definitely more convenient to be able to pre-buff before engaging trash. Gravelord's Sacrifice increases my damage with dots and class abilities by 15%. Unfortunately, using this skill does no damage by itself, so I feel like the increase is more like 10%. But if you're like me and you're not a huge fan of the original Blastbones minigame, this skill is a great alternative. Next, I use my Skeletal Archer skill. This undead minion fires arrows at enemies while it's active and does good damage. Thanks to the Undead Confederate passive, I get a 200 point bonus to stamina recovery while the archer is active. Now I use the Stampede skill, which is from the two-handed skill line. This is a gap closer that's always a critical strike. Remember that when we get to the gear section, because that guaranteed critical strike is going to come into play. This skill also increases my weapon damage, where my greatsword has the infused trait and a weapon damage glyph. Now I'm going to use Unnerving Boneyard, which has a big buff coming with this update. I've got to be honest, this skill pretty much sucked until now. Its major breach only lasted 10 seconds, which made it inferior to just about any source of major breach I can think of. Well, with this update, major breach will last about 15 seconds, which actually makes this skill useful. On top of that, it'll apply minor vulnerability for an additional 5% damage. Now you're talking. From worst to first. Now if I'm doing a Necro build from here on out, I'm sure to include this skill. Another reason I'm happy about this is that this skill always had a super cool animation. I like that I'm going to be able to give my character a little bit more of that Necro flavor now. Also on this bar I have Resolving Vigor as my heal. I was informed recently by a viewer that you don't actually have to PvP to get this skill. If you do the PvP tutorial, you'll be able to unlock it. So for anybody that's allergic to PvP, that's good news. Last on this bar is my ultimate, Glacial Colossus. The Colossus smashes the ground, dealing frost damage to enemies in the area, and also causes enemies to be affected by major vulnerability for 17 seconds. Major vulnerability increases the damage enemies take by 10%. Okay, let's look at the dual wield bar. First on the dual wield bar is Deadly Cloak. Deadly Cloak surrounds my character with a protective cloak of razors, damaging nearby enemies and granting me major evasion. It's true that I almost never do a dual wield build without this skill, and neither should you unless you have a darn good reason. Next I use Barb Trap, which is probably the most widely used Fighters Guild skill. And that's because Barb Trap provides the minor force buff and does bleed damage over time. Now as it turns out, I don't actually need the minor force buff from this, but the bleed damage works out well. Now I use Blood Craze, which is another skill that does bleed damage over time. This is from the dual wield skill line, and it also has a secondary function that gives me a small heal. Next I use the Scribe skill, Bloody Knife. That's my custom morph of the Traveling Knife skill. This is my third skill that does bleed damage, so I have the potential for the hemorrhaging status effect to stack 3 times and do its maximum damage. Bloody Knife also provides the Ruffian passive and gives me minor berserk. Ruffian is going to increase the damage of my next attack by 15% because it comes from the dual wield skill line. That attack is my old friend, Rapid Strikes. Rapid Strikes deals damage in 4 consecutive hits and has a small cast time. I'm going to use Rapid Strikes usually about 8 times. I say usually because I'm wearing a gear set which is going to dictate the length of time I use Rapid Strikes. More on that in a minute. Finally on this bar is the Fighters Guild Ultimate, Flawless Dawnbreaker, and I have that slotted for the passive increase to weapon damage. Mizik frowns on violence. Me, I can't get enough of it. Let's see what the build does. Sorry, no combat metrics table for you this time. It's not surprising that it isn't working on the test server currently. It is surprising that it's actually worked in most recent PTS patches. Anyway, the build eked out 56,000 points of damage per second. I can't see what kind of RNG I had that fight, but I can tell you this was a typical result. And like the other builds I give you, that amount of damage can take you anywhere you want to go. It's pretty easy to guess one of the 5-piece gear sets I'm wearing, so let's go ahead and look at the gear. Well, that business out at the Weatherly Estate worked out pretty well. Another feather in your cap, Mizik. What's next?
There are bigger mysteries than just murder. Grand, exciting mysteries. The disappearance of the dwarves, for example. On second thought, Mizik feels fine investigating smaller mysteries for now.
The first 5-piece set I have on is Pillar of Nirn. Pillar of Nirn causes a fissure to open beneath enemies that does instant bleed damage and bleed damage over time. This is an area of effect attack, but the area is so small that you can consider this primarily single target unless enemies are grouped very closely. If your tank is on point about pulling enemies together, this set will be more effective. Pillar of Nirn comes from the Falkreath Hold dungeon, and getting the final boss to cough up a dagger may be challenging. But remember, this build is part of a short series devoted to gear that's a little more difficult to get. So I have 2 daggers, both of which are in the charge trait. And for the new folks, the charge trait increases your chance of proccing status effects. My main hand has a poison glyph and my offhand has a fire enchantment. My back bar weapon on this setup is where things get interesting. I have an Aegis Caller 2-handed sword. The trait is infused and the enchantment is weapon damage. That works hand in hand with the Stampede skill to increase my weapon damage. The Aegis Caller set is a 5-piece set that comes out of the Unhallowed Grave dungeon. This is a fairly difficult DLC dungeon and you'll have to farm the final boss to get the greatsword. The Aegis Caller set summons a lesser Aegis once every 12 seconds and it spins its blades doing bleed damage in a wide area. This set is devastating on trash mobs, making quick work of them. The main criticism of this set is that enemies can easily move out of its area. But with this build, it's really simple to control the proc. The Stampede skill will always proc the Aegis Caller because Stampede is a guaranteed crit. I told you back in the skills section this was going to come up again. Pillar of Nirn procs once every 10 seconds, so proccing Pillar of Nirn twice on the front bar and Aegis Caller once on the back is a pretty good fit. Pillar of Nirn procs easily off of any damage, so timing the front bar is easy. After the second proc, I just switch to my back bar. And that's what I meant when I said earlier that my damage bar was going to be timed by one of my gear sets. Because I have 2 5-piece sets that are only on one bar, I can run a monster set and a mythic item as well. My monster set is Prior Theric, and that comes from the Red Petal Bastion dungeon, which is another pretty difficult delve. To get the monster helm, you'll have to do this on Vet. Prior Theric causes a whirlwind beneath my target that damages enemies in the area. It also increases the damage of area of effect abilities by 5%. Like the Aegis Caller set, this set is procced by Stampede, so it's a great fit with this build, but it's not required. If you have really good light attack weaving, you can probably get more out of Zahn. But honestly, Prior Theric is pretty hard to beat on this one. I also like Prior Theric because it has a low-key animation that doesn't interfere with my Necromancer mojo. And yeah, I actually do try to theme things a little. There's one more piece of gear in this setup, and that's the weapon-Nirn Mage's Amulet. This mythic item gives me the minor force buff and increases my damage done to monsters by 15%. Of course, it basically switches off light attack damage, but I'm okay with that. One of the leads for this item comes from the trophy vault at the end of the Scrivener's Hall dungeon. The good news is on this one you can do the dungeon on normal. Armor weights on this setup are medium and I have all Divine's traits and stamina enchantments. The jewelry is bloodthirsty with weapon damage glyphs. Alright, that's it for the gear. Let's look at champion points. The blue champion points are Fighting Finesse, Deadly Aim, Thaumaturge, and Wrathful Strikes.
Mizik shudders to hear of unsolved murders being attributed to a weapon called the Blade of Woe. A summoned blade, never once compounded as evidence. Surely such a weapon is only a myth, yes? Yes?
That must be a myth. I never heard of it. Yeah, sounds like one of those urban legends to me. Well guys, that's it for today. I'm excited about the changes to Necromancer going live soon. The improved functionality of Unnerving Boneyard and the greater convenience of Gravelord's Sacrifice are awesome changes. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, help me out by crushing the like button. If you want to see more content like this, please consider subscribing to the channel. There's a fashion show and a fight at the end as usual, so if you're interested in that stuff, stick around. Well, Mizik, what's next for you?
Another mystery is right around the corner. Mizik can feel it in his little gray hairs.